So first of all, thanks for being here. I know all of you, so I'm not really going to get into who I am. I'm just a dude trying to make things better at GVSU. But this morning we have a great presentation by Dr. Daisy Fredericks. She's going to be talking about facilitating group work using asynchronous tools. And I think the piece that I thought this was really intriguing simply because of all the online work we've been doing this past year. And a lot of people are trying to figure out how to use groups in either the asynchronous or the synchronous meetings. And so we thought this would be a great topic for many of us to take a look at and hear what Daisy's doing in her practice. So Daisy, with that, you are ready to go and take over.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. Do you mind if I share my screen? I have a little presentation, a
Sure.
PowerPoint that I use.
I'm going to make you a co-host.
Oh, thank you.
Should be good now.
Well, let's see here. Are you all able to see my PowerPoint? No?
Yeah.
Okay. So that might not work. Yeah, I'm not getting it on my end how I normally see it, where I can just select my thing.
Okay,
But
well, how about if I pull it up on the screen and you can tell me when to move to the next slide?
yeah,
Does that work for you?
yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. And you want it in present mode?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so we can move to the next slide. This was the agenda for today, kind of my thinking as I thought about group work. And as I was sharing with Rick, I don't have any like bells and whistles, super sexy, cutting edge new tools for asynchronous teaching, but rather I thought about how I've taught. I've done asynchronous teaching for about 10 years now, and I've taught at Arizona State University, University of Maryland, College Park, Chandler Gilbert Community College. I've used Blackboard, I've used Canvas in these different spaces. So I pulled back and thought about some of the different principled practices that I used and how we get to a space where you can facilitate group work. And so that's kind of what I want to share with you today, those big ideas. So we have a little bit of time for a quick introduction. And I wanted to start with just some general tips for asynchronous teaching. That's kind of like the setting of the scene, your big course. And then I have some specific tools for facilitating large and small group meetings, and then some techniques for group work success. Those are a little out of order. And then hopefully we have some time that I would like to invite you all to share some things that you're doing in your own courses, or perhaps questions that you have that we could explore together. So, all right, Rick. Okay, so in the chat box, if you just want to share the number of years teaching in higher education, or quickly like a shout out to experiences, years even teaching online, just so I kind of have a quick sense. I know we go to these meetings and most folks know each other, but I'm still learning people and their names here. And then if you were asked to teach an asynchronous online course, what would your response be? One, would it be kind of in meltdown mode? Two, okay, there might be a couple of tears brewing here. And three, yeah, got this. All right, 13 years, one online, 8 to 10, both online. Okay. So lots and lots and lots of teaching experience. And then, I've been teaching a long time in higher education and also K-12 schools. And definitely this past year has been a hard pivot for a lot of folks. I was very grateful that I'd had a lot of experience coming into this, but it also challenged me to rethink how I offer asynchronous courses to students who might not be super excited to take asynchronous courses. And so again, that's a little bit about what I'm going to share today. So, all right, Rick, we're going to move forward. So some tips for asynchronous teaching in general. I shared a Google Doc with you in the chat at the very top. And there's just kind of like 6 principles. Actually, there are more of them. But whenever I set up my course for asynchronous teaching, there's a range of ways that you can do it. You know, I've worked with colleagues who just have things up there. People can work at it whenever they want. They do the readings, they take a quiz, they take a test, they might get feedback from an instructor, post to discussion board. It just kind of depends. For me, I want to create an asynchronous space for my students where they still feel like they're part of a community of learners. And I still want them to know that I'm there as their instructor. I want them to know that they can reach out to me, that they still have a way to get to know me. So first and foremost, I'm always thinking of a way to create a community for collaboration. And I do that because I want everybody within that group to just really feel connected with each other as well as with me. So I do a lot of sharing through announcements, through videos. I ask them to connect with each other as well so that you can create a kind and warm space for folks to come together. Another one is to be organized. So with asynchronous teaching, you really have to put a lot of time and energy up front into organizing all of your materials, resources, and learning opportunities, just in ways that are really easy and very accessible for learners. So like, for instance, we're using Blackboard here now. So there's a lot of time and thought put into how I've organized my left-hand column and how I've organized the different modules. And I can give you a little tour of how I've set up my course after we walk through some of these things. Another guiding principle is to be present, and being present in an asynchronous course is very different than being present in an in-person or even a synchronous course. So by being present, I just really mean that you're constantly reaching out and communicating with your students. And so I do a lot of announcements. There's usually one that comes out every Monday or Tuesday at morning at the latest. I put messages on every single assignment that they submit. If there are other things, I might wait 2 or 3 days and then put out another announcement. But we don't go stretches of time where there's no interaction between myself or the students. So they can feel my instructor presence, of course, even though it's asynchronous online learning. I also suggest to be available. And by this semester, this is something new that I've started where 2 times a week for 1 hour, like today, I'll meet students from 3 to 4. Yesterday was 1 to 2. I have Daisy Zoom check-ins. And so I tell them, you know, it's optional when you want to come, but I just ask that you meet with me at least once a month, just to pop in, say hello, ask me questions. If these times don't work for you, we can set up another time. Um, and I can't tell you how appreciative students have been for me just creating that space to be available to them. So, you know, being available, especially right now, is just crucial for students. They're really craving connections with their instructors, especially in asynchronous formats. Another principle that I draw from is to humanize your course. And so that lends itself to creating that community for collaboration. So asynchronous learning can be very rote and it can be super text heavy. And that, like a lot of students, that turns them off. So humanizing the course can help bring them back into that community. And it's just like these little tiny things that you do, asking them to use pictures of themselves to humanize them and myself too, or using an avatar or some other kind of image that represents them. Using videos or voice narrated PowerPoints or Prezis or some other kind of presentation. They really like hearing that there's a person on the other end of that thinking, in addition to seeing the thoughts that are on the slide. And it doesn't have to be anything super long. even just a couple of minutes, they really, really like that piece. Um, and then elicit feedback from the learners, especially in this asynchronous platform. This semester, I teach 4 sections of the same course, EDI 310, and not every single student in those sections want to take an asynchronous course, right? So a lot of them have been pleasantly surprised that it does feel like a community in there and they're still learning a ton of stuff, even though they want us to be able to get together. Um, and so at the midpoint, I offer a midterm reflection for students to get feedback from them. I get feedback on what's working, what's not working, what can I do to change things so we can finish the rest of the semester strong. And if students give me, some suggestions that I can do, I do those things. So it's all of it is to help them be more productive and be more successful in this space. And I found those things really useful. So these are just kind of some tips for setting up an asynchronous course, generally speaking, that have worked really well for me over, the last few years. Okay, Rick, we're gonna now transition into some specific tools for facilitating group work. And so when we think about asynchronous tools, there's a lot of new things that have come out. But really, when we think about tools, it's just the ability to communicate and collaborate over a period through different time, different place mode. For example, when I taught at Arizona State, I had students from literally around the world, all different time zones, all different spaces. So they had to be able to work at their own time and pace, but we could still do things together. It just looked a little bit differently. So when I think about these tools, I think about ways that students can work at their own pace, because that is something that's very attractive about asynchronous learning. So with that in mind, some of the tools that I share are going to seem a little mundane, but I'm going to share some different ways that I've kind of worked with them and made them work for what we do. So first and foremost, thinking about facilitating group work. I'm thinking about the whole group first. I do a lot of discussion board, and right now everybody is in discussion board fatigue mode, like they're kind of over it, right? But I was also surprised in the midterm feedback that students commented that they really did appreciate the discussion board, and they offered some different reasons why. And so I'll share some of those reasons, as well as some of my own thinking behind that. So they liked that they were able to talk about topics that were related to classroom management, which is the theme of our course, and that everything was very well connected to what they were doing in their actual internships, and then also the larger assignments for the course. So, that those were just a couple of things, but here are just some guiding principles about pushing past the discussion board fatigue and getting students to engage as a whole group, a whole community of learners, that I think are really important. So I do a lot of checking in with students. So aside from just asking them questions about content, I do a check-in where each week it's something different, like share an emoji that summarizes how last week went. Or if you had a song that could describe last week, what would it be and why? So just like little things so they can share snippets of their everyday lives. And this past week, as I was going through them, everybody's kind of in the muck right now and they're super stressed and overwhelmed. And it was just so cool because all of the students, were like, just like leaning on each other and, oh man, I'm so sorry you had such a miserable week, like what can I do to help? And so you've got 23 students in this space, and that check-in is just really important, and it keeps bringing students back in to focus on what we're talking about as well, while also supporting their emotional needs and learning too. So I do check-ins with discussion board to bring in another humanizing dimension. I also have very clear expectations for what I want for posts. I have word limits, like everybody does an original post and 2 response posts. The original posts are due on Thursday, 300 words. The 2 response posts are 150 words each, and those are due by Sunday. And it's just very clearly stated each week. It's stated again and again and again so that there's no confusion, because students are getting a little bit confused. They're doing discussion boards in a lot of classes. So, you know, that's something to think about too. um, Also, if the discussion board doesn't really meet the expectations, I leave that in a message, you know, so I don't walk away saying, oh, I shouldn't do discussion board because they're just saying, that's nice, that's neat. Like I give them very specific feedback on what I'm looking for up front, and that usually alleviates that tension for grading. Um, I think about the quality of the prompts and discussion board. Does it connect to the readings, to the materials, to a larger project? I often include more than one question so that students can get at a couple of different things. I give opportunities for learners to exchange their messages so they can use documents, maybe to share additional ideas to support their discussion board posts. They can use media files, links, images. I have a lot of students who will share additional resources that then I will share on with the rest of the class too, in case somebody didn't read their post. Yeah, so I think like there's a number of things that we can do with discussion board that keeps students still engaged. You really have to think about how you set up that space and how you maintain that space. So those are just some thoughts. And like I said, that's how I get students really working in the whole group setting. And I will say after we're done with that weekly discussion board, I do provide a weekly synthesis of the larger comments from that board. And I did have one student say, I'm really glad that you did that because, you know, sometimes I'm not able to read everybody's posts. So I at least have a general idea of what other folks are saying. And then they said, it also makes it seem like, you know, this isn't just another exercise or another chore for us to do. There's really a purpose behind it. So that was nice feedback. And I want to point out that you can use discussion boards in the small group settings, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. Another tool I use a lot are videos. So not only do I embed videos in the asynchronous course that might come from YouTube that will demonstrate a concept or whatnot, but this semester especially, I've been creating a lot of my own videos. And I hate making videos. I am a terrible video maker entirely, but the students love it. So like I'll make videos. I did actually make a video for every single assignment that we do in this course that just kind of explained it. Even though there are very clear directions for how to do it, I talk them through those directions and they love it. I'm working at making videos that go along with my weekly PowerPoints, but I have stuck with voice narration for that at this point. But on the handout that I've provided, I shared a couple of platforms that you can use to create videos. So far, I've used Zoom. I'm really interested in Pear Deck and Screencastify. And I wanted to give a shout out to Rick Geisel because he introduced me to Loom, which I've used to give voice narrated feedback. I haven't done the videos yet, but Rick's a total expert on that. So, but those are hot links. And so they'll take you to those spaces if you're interested in other kinds of resources and tools for making videos. So those are just two things that I do for the whole group setting for facilitating group work. Are there any questions so far? I feel like I'm talking so much, but.
Yeah, I got a couple. I think there's a couple in the chat. Two things though, Daisy, before we keep going. One is, can you reshare the Google Doc in the chat? Because I don't think we can, some of us don't have access to that link. And then also, we're picking up quite a bit of static from, I think, from your mic and the papers that might be near the mic. So if you can just be aware of that. There was a couple questions in there. Oh, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was around, you talked about meeting with your students twice a week. And I wanted to know, is that with any of your classes? Like you have 3 classes right now, and so anyone from those 3 classes can pop in during those times, or you're holding 2 sessions per class?
So I actually have 4 classes that I'm teaching right now, and they're all of the same, they're the same prep. So 4 sections of EDI 310. And in my weekly announcement, I just post a Zoom invitation to them. And it can be anybody from any of the sections. They just kind of pop in and, some of them will stay and hang out and they talk with each other. And then sometimes I'll have students that will stay and they'll just ask me additional questions about classroom management, but there's no structure to any of it. It's just purely questions, conversation, checking in, making sure everything is going okay.
Okay. Thank you.
And I had offered it originally on Tuesday from like 1 to 3, but then what I learned is that there were quite a few students who had conflicts, so I kind of turned it into 2 days for 1 hour at a time, and that seemed to be helpful. And students just really, really appreciated having that time and space. Though there are some weeks nobody shows up, right? Now,
Yeah.
next week, everybody will show up because it's the last week of March, and if they haven't come, this is gonna be their time to do it, so.
Yeah, I'm asking that question because I've always struggled with that. I've done virtual, those kinds of meetings in the evening, like from 7 to 9. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the time that my students say they can get away, because they would sign up for like 15 or 20-minute appointments. And I have done that because I have 4 different sections right now. So I can't just have someone coming from a different course coming into, it just doesn't make for very convenient, where they're waiting around. So I don't know. I'm asking because I'm still trying to figure it out to make it more convenient. I don't want to hold a 2-hour section every week for every class.
Right.
Um,
And one thing I don't know if there's a tool for this or not, but I was wondering if there was like some kind of scheduling app where they could set up an appointment, kind of like in office hours almost, but for, Zoom check-ins where that was
yeah.
one thing I was thinking of. And I'm not familiar with that tool. I just kind of sit and hang out there and whoever pops in, pops in. I do my work you know, and also, it's a strategy that I share with these, future K-12 teachers who are teaching in virtual settings. This is something that their teachers are doing in classrooms, especially with high school students. They're just creating a Zoom space for kids to come in and hang out and work,
Yep.
because there's something about that collective nature of being together and working together that's really helpful. So,
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had something. I was just curious, when you're putting out like different discussion board methods and going through like discussion board stuff, are you putting an adaptive release on that, or are you just always keeping it open?
no, this semester I have put adaptive release on that. Um, the way that I teach, I don't set everything up for students to work through at their own pace.
Mhm.
And that in part is because I don't want students to try to quickly get through stuff and jump through everything too fast. I want us to approach this from a community of scholars and learners together. So I think of my week from Monday through Sunday,
Mhm.
right? That's week 1. And then I release the next one. So like Friday, 9 a.m., I will release the next learning module for the upcoming week.
Gotcha.
So,
Do you
and I
make
do the same thing with discussion board.
do you make the like the old discussion board go away?
No,
Okay, that was more what I was wondering. I've ran in from a student perspective, I ran into a few classes where we were having kind of a continual discussion about, the topic of the class, but every couple weeks we would lose all of the old discussion. And then I don't remember what I said 2 weeks ago, and I want to go back and, reference it, and it's gone. So I was just kind of curious what, how you were doing that.
no, I like to leave it open because all of the discussion boards are intentional so that they can do the final project. So the questions that I ask are connected to the final project so they can go back there and rethink their ideas and whatnot.
That
So,
was exactly the problem I ran into. Was I was needing to go back and I had no way to access that other than, like, I'm not going to use Blackboard admin to mess with that in my own class. That seemed a little skeezy, but yeah, so I couldn't find what I said, and I thought I had a good point at one point in time, but now I didn't know. So good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And then I see Jonathan, he uses Google Calendar appointment scheduler for scheduling individual conferences with students. Oh, that is something I would love to check out. Um, you know, this is my first semester actually doing the Daisy Zoom check-ins, and some weeks, I get lots of students, and then other weeks I don't see anybody. But I will say the feedback that I've gotten from folks is that they just really appreciate having that space and that I'm making myself available for them. So it's something I plan to continue to do. And then Rick, is that Google Suite? I don't know. Okay.
Sorry,
Rick,
I'm
can we
here.
move to the next one?
Nope.
Okay, so I was thinking a bit about some of the assignments that I do small group work for. So in the Blackboard that we have now, and I can show you how we do this, but likely this is going to change how we set up small groups depending on what platform we take up. But I use the groups function in Blackboard. And I'll use this for, I have an assignment called critical incidents. And this is a space where I'll put 3 to 5 people together to talk about a very specific vignette or some kind of critical incident or controversy. So in that space, they can have a much more intimate conversation, but it's usually done through discussion board. I know on other platforms like Canvas, you can make videos a little more readily, and you can also do voice narration. That's pretty easy. In this Blackboard, you can do those same kinds of things, but there are a couple more steps that you do have to take. So I also do literature circles in my courses where, 3 to 4 students will get together to talk about a book. This was something that's usually much more productive in person, but this semester we've shifted this entirely asynchronous, where they had to determine, synchronous meeting times to connect via Zoom. But again, they have this small group setting where they can share files, they can share pictures and images, and they can talk about topics surrounding, a book. A course that I teach during spring, they do actually small group presentations where small groups of students will have to put together a cohesive 10-slide PowerPoint presentation with voice narration that covers the content of a chapter that we then, read and discuss, and that connects with our weekly learning. And they do all of that. Oftentimes I'll give them some tools that are available in the groups function in Blackboard. But a lot of times they've got tools that they use too. They'll go to texting or Zoom, or they used to meet in person, but that wasn't always possible. So those are some examples of assignments that I do, and I do those within, like I said, the group function. I shared a little link here, a bonus link at the bottom called Tools for Online Asynchronous Teaching. And so this takes you to just like a quick article that kind of recaps some other things, and there are other resources that folks might be interested in as well. Okay, Rick, we're gonna move to the next slide. I'm trying to keep track of my time here. Okay. Oh, can we go one more slide ahead? There we go. So just some other techniques, some things. Like I said, I don't use a lot of bells and whistles and flashy things. I use a lot of old school tools and some very mundane tools actually, that I have just found to be super effective and just as efficient as some of the new things that are out there. But whenever you're doing asynchronous teaching, it's challenging because, you're not there in person with each other. And so everything takes place either through email or some kind of Zoom session and whatnot. So you really have to be thoughtful about the tools that you bring into that course and the things that you ask your students to do. You always have to stop and consider, is this tool going to help or hinder the assignment? Are there going to be more questions about how to use the actual tool? Because if so, I'm not sure that I would bring that in. So one other thing is just providing crystal clear directions, not only for the expectations of groups, right? or assignments or anything. But if you're bringing in tech tools like voice thread or voice narration, anything like that, you want to give some direction and how to use that, or at least provide links that they can go to know how to access that, or they're going to come back to you with those kinds of questions. And one other thing is that there is this thing in Blackboard, the site that, or the platform that we currently use, that's called statistics tracking, I believe. You can enable that so that you can also monitor and check to make sure that students are actually engaged and participating in your course. That's a big concern for many instructors who teach asynchronously, because you're like, how do I know that they're actually reading? How do I know that they're actually reviewing these things? Well, you can use this tool. It will run a report on, you know, when they reviewed the PowerPoint or when they tapped into that particular module. You just have to make sure that you set that up. So, okay, Rick, we'll go to the next slide. So here's a space now where time for questions, or if we can just kind of open it up and just share what are some tips, tools, tricks that you all have used, you know, and just kind of use this as time and space to collaborate here. I was going to say, we can stop the sharing of the PowerPoint too.
One thing, Daisy, that I've used in the past, it hasn't been very popular. Maybe you've already used this, but is a video requiring students to create videos through, now the name is, Hunter, you know what I'm talking about. Did you?
Nocto or Flipgrid?
Flipgrid, thanks. They've had to do it with like a final assignment where they would narrate their speech on Flipgrid. It's not one of their favorite things to do, but afterwards they said I'd get feedback like, you know, I didn't like the fact that I had to do that on video, but it made me really think about what I would say if I was working with my staff as a lead principal, and it forced me to really like put it all together rather than just in a paper where they tell you what they think their vision for school, being a school principal would be, etc. So it's a good strategy as well. And it sounds like you've been doing some of that also.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch to my other computer here. So hopefully I can share my Blackboard site with you all too. But it is, nobody likes to be recorded the first time. Nobody likes to hear themselves on audio. Nobody likes to see themselves on video teaching. It's pretty terrifying for some of us, right? And so when you work with students, you ask them to do that, you always have to remember this is their first go at that. So it does feel very overwhelming. And you have to just assure them that, you know, you'll get more comfortable with it as time moves on, or you just learn to deal with, that's how I sound, or that's how I look on video, what? But I give them a couple of options if I'm asking them to use voice narration, just because I think options are good, because without question, I always get someone who's using like a PC and I'm like, PC person, right? Or I can't guide them through how to do something how I want to. So I usually have a couple of options available for them, and we do talk about that. But with presentations especially, I put time limits on things so that way they're very clear and they're very concise with their presentations. When you don't do that, they feel like if they talk more, it's going to be a better presentation. And I'm like, no, nobody will continue to listen after like 5 minutes or 10 minutes max, right? And you won't be able to upload it to the platform usually. There are all kinds of glitches here. So, you know, just having those really clear directions are super useful.
Something we suggest for this specifically to like Flipgrid or any like one-off technology like that is, or third-party technology, I guess, is use it more than once if you're going to use it, because if you don't end up, like, if you use it once, your students are going to wonder, like, well, why did we do that? Like, that, was this just to try the tool, or what was up? Especially with Flipgrid. Justin always can attest to this in his own class. Like, the first time they do a video, they hate it. Just like the rest of us, like me and Noah are video people. I can speak for myself. I hate it. But after that, you start getting a little more used to it, and you start getting that, you know, seeing yourself and hearing yourself, and it gets a lot easier. But likewise, Padlet or anything like that, use it more than once.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And you know, after they work through that discomfort phase and they become very comfortable with it, then it's like, okay, I've got it now. So like in 310, for example, they have to create a classroom management plan using some kind of online portfolio site. Initially, it was Weebly. Weebly is not super user-friendly or intuitive. And so some students were like, oh, we've got Wix. Can we use Wix? I'm like, yeah. So we brought that one in. And then a lot of students are using Google Sites. So I've added to what, you know, students can use. And if they have a good platform, I'm always encouraging them to share that. And I'm more than happy to allow students, you know, I invite them, please bring that in if you find that something useful or helpful. Because if you can lower those frustration levels, then you can create more space for learning, right? And engagement.
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say, I think I should be able to share my screen now, but let me try that. And Rick, did you have a question or a comment or?
No, I was just gonna say to both you and Hunter that you're wise with your words about like a Flipgrid, use of Flipgrid. I did do that the first time I ever used it. I just had it right at the end of the course, and I learned pretty quickly that that's not a good strategy. So, you know, since then I've been doing stuff like what you've talked about. You know, the first time they use it is, hey, they have to do an intro video right at the beginning of the course. Hey, you have to do a you know, response to a question that we generated in a synchronous meeting. And so leading them up to the place where they do that final vision presentation on video. Yeah, I learned it the hard way, but now I know.
Yeah, so, and so when I first learned about Flipgrid, it was actually kind of clunky for me to use, and it created some additional frustrations. And I thought, I'm never going to use Flipgrid again. This was a disaster. But then they also had upgraded it and it became much easier. I don't use Flipgrid a lot throughout the course, but I did find it as something that was relatively easy for students to videotape themselves and then share with the rest of the class. And I like the idea of them doing that, because when they can watch videos of each other, it just, you get a better sense of who we are as people. And again, it just really strengthens that community of learners. And that is so important for asynchronous learning. So.